Yeah, so that's an important thing to realize about this, that the child, or I mean, it works the same when you're a grown-up, but we're talking about working with children. And also children start with a blank. So it would be really nice if before the children get to school where you're going to teach them, if they had 5 or 6 or 7 years of their parents and their friends and relatives only writing positive messages in their consciousness, then they come to the school and they'll all be perfect little students and wonderful. But do you expect you're going to have all perfect little students in the class? See, you're probably not. There's going to be some kids in there that are going to be a little bit of a challenge behaviorally to get them to act right as students in a classroom. Because virtually every one of them will have watched television, among other things. They'll have seen school kids, maybe in other countries, acting bad. They'll have seen cartoons of people acting bad and violence and lying and being rude and all sorts of things. So all of those messages that are written in there, they will have some impact on the behavior of the children that come into the school. By the way, all of the problems that exist in the world, all the terrible problems, the wars and the murders, and the robberies and the rapes and the drug abuses and the corruptions and pollutions and I mean, you name it, right? Every single problem that exists in the world exists because we live in a society that writes messages in enough people in the human race that large numbers of people do all those wrong things. And they wouldn't do those wrong things unless they had grown up in an environment that wrote those bad messages in there. See, once again, this is what Islam is about. It's about the creation of a society that doesn't write bad messages. In a right Islamic society, everywhere you go, people are going to be writing the same true and good messages into your consciousness. Because everywhere you go, everyone will be acting according to the will of Allah. And that will show only good things. So if we had a fully and truly Islamic world, every single social problem that exists in the world today would disappear. I mean, it's that easy. You know, it's like there's no question that's true. It's an absolute provable fact by the nature of how people learn and develop. That if we don't want bad things going on in the world, we have to create a society that doesn't write any bad messages. As long as we have societies writing bad messages, we'll have people doing wrong behaviors. I mean, you know, because often people say, well, oh, it's such a complex problem. Nobody can know why all these terrible things happen. No, we know exactly why all these things happen. Because we have a world society that influences people toward doing those bad things. Now, of course, in the school, we want to try and create an environment where every message written in there is the message that Allah would want in that situation. But to protect the children later, we'll have to, and I'll show you in a little bit, we'll have to show you'll have to show the children a technique by which they can resist bad messages being written in there. We'll take this big box and we'll make it a little box here. This is the person when they start out, the child when they start out. And up here is the end of their life. Now, between here and there's going to be all sorts of messages written in their consciousness. Since no moment is the same as the one before, they are not going to be the same here as they were there. And every message that gets written in there is either going to be a good message, take you to Allah, or good or bad message, take you to Shaitan. So at death, there's only 2 places you can possibly go. Okay? That's the 2 alternatives. Now, as learning takes place, there's a process called shaping that goes on. We don't learn things in one big leap. Like say, for instance, you're going to be teaching children multiplication tables, and you want them to learn up to 12 times 12. You don't go from not knowing any to 12 times 12. So you can't jump from a starting point of not knowing how to multiply at all to 12 times 12, which is the goal. You have to go through a series of small, rewarded steps to get there. And everything we have learned in our lives and everything we teach anybody has to go through this shaping process. Basically, unless Allah wants to create a miracle, you can't jump from where you are to a goal. You have to get there through a series of steps. There's just no other way. So that shaping process is like the process of life. Life is a shaping process toward death. And it's a shaping process toward one of those two. Because the goal isn't always what you want to be. The goal is where you end up. So this means in the beginning, children don't do very bad. So it's a little hard in the beginning to tell which way the children are going. But then after a while, the paths start to diverge a little bit. Now, up until puberty, or 15 years old, Allah is not going to hold you accountable for wrong you have done. So I gather this means until puberty or 15 years old, if you die, you're guaranteed paradise. But that doesn't mean that you have not already started on one of these two paths. It just means Allah is not going to give you just punishment for the wrong you have done. How early do you think on this path children get started either this way or that way? I mean, how early would you guess you can see a child and for example, let's just take the path to hellfire. Do you think with a 2-year-old child, you can see a 2-year-old child and see that they are unfortunately already on this path? See, I think that you can. If you had a 2-year-old child who is hitting other people and doesn't care, and taking things from other kids and doesn't care, right? I would say, because they can do those behaviors at 2 years old, if they are doing those behaviors at 2 years old, they have gotten started on this path. But because the distance between here and there is like almost nothing, to change them is very easy. So if you see a child there, you have a really big responsibility to help them get over on the other side. Because those behaviors are done, they come from the messages written in here. So if you have a child that is hitting other people and enjoying it, and taking things from other people and not caring, the child's doing it because of the messages written in here. And since the messages can either take you closer to Allah or closer to Shaitan, we know the child has had some messages written in there that take them closer to Shaitan. So we need to change the messages that are written in there. By the way, the only way to change somebody, right? There's no other way to change somebody unless Allah wants to intervene. If you want to change somebody, you have to change the way they think. And to change the way they think, you have to change the messages that are stored in their consciousness. I mean, it's simplistic, but it's important to understand these simple things. So if there's anything you want to change about yourself or somebody else, you have to change the thought processes that go on. Because Allah has told us, the thought comes before the deed. Right? So you can't do anything without preceding it with a thought. So if you want to change somebody's behavior, you have to change how they think. There's only one way to change how people think, and that's to change the messages that have been written into their consciousness or their total past learning history. So when you get the children in the school, because they'll all be very young children, but still, you'll see some of them have, obviously by their behavior, you can tell that they have had bad messages written into their consciousness. So, although in some parts of the world, schools and teachers say it's not their responsibility to deal with a child's social behavior, just to teach them knowledge, that's not, in an Islamic school, that's total nonsense. Our first responsibility is to help them become a right Muslim human being, and secondary, to teach them academically. So, for all the things that you see that are wrong behaviors in the children, you will know that those wrong behaviors occur because of messages that have been written in their consciousness. And if you want to change them, you have to write other messages in their consciousness that get them to think differently and want to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing. And also, this relates to the issue of permissiveness. Because in the school, we want to have a policy which is called, about wrong behavior, we want to have a zero tolerance policy for wrong behavior. Now, somebody could say, well, that seems really harsh. You know, they're just little kids. You know, they're just playing, they don't know any better. Well, they may not know any better, but anytime you do something wrong and nobody corrects it, it is like being told that is okay what you do. So it works the same as getting a small reward for your behavior. And if you get a reward for your behavior, that behavior tends to increase in the future. So sometimes parents and teachers think they are being nice to the kids by not mentioning every wrong thing that they do. You know, you just don't get on the kids all the time over every little wrong thing. You just let them get away with a lot. You be tolerant, and we feel like tolerance like that is a positive thing. But it is not a positive thing, because every wrong behavior that goes on that you tolerate is a movement along this path. Every wrong behavior is a movement on the path to hellfire. And every behavior that is rewarded speeds up that path toward hellfire. So every time you ignore a wrong behavior that a child does, you're helping them move along the path to hellfire. This is a very important thing for parents and teachers to realize. So you can't be nice to kids by being tolerant of their wrong behavior. You're actually harming them badly. But we will talk about later nice ways to deal with that, right? So although we'll have a zero tolerance policy for wrong behavior, we'll have very positive ways to deal with the children, to correct their behavior, so that they'll even feel good about having their behavior corrected. But it is, and it's important also for the children to, these things that I'm telling, almost everything I tell you would be good if you could get over to the children those ideas in very simple stages. Like, we don't want to scare the kids, but we also, it's very important for Muslims to understand that one of the possibilities in life is to end up in hellfire. I mean, it's not that we should be good just so we can get to paradise, right? We should be good because we love Allah and want to do what He says. But we also need to know the consequences. I mean, this is why we tell children, don't stick your hand in the fire because it'll get burnt. Because we don't want them to suffer the consequences. Well, how much worse is the consequence if you end up in hellfire rather than have a burnt hand? So this is a huge, huge thing that responsibility we have to be sure the children don't come out of our school, or if we're parents, our children don't grow up in our home anywhere on this path. And so we have to look at that, and the children need to know from a very early age that, and you don't have to say how terrible the hellfire is, right? Because you don't want to scare the little kids. But you can say, you know, your life is leading to one of two places. and one is a place that's not nice, and one is a place that is really nice. So you can put it that way so you don't scare the kids. And then as they get older, you can explain more and more until they can handle understanding really how bad hellfire is and how wonderful paradise is. But they need to know that they are going to be living lives of having messages written into their consciousness, and each of these messages will be taking them in one of those directions. So this is very important to teach the children this, to be able to see the influences when they come in and make an accurate judgment on, is it a good message or a bad message. Now, even, I haven't got to the main part of this yet, but even this far, you see, most people do not look at the world this way. We just go along in the world and we don't think that we are becoming who we are by the influences upon us. We just go on oblivious or not noticing the influences or not feeling that they are doing anything to us. But they are doing something very serious to us. And if we are not using our inner speech to take control of our lives in the direction, we will go, just like the animals, we'll go whatever direction the external influences take us. And in the world we have today, if you went the way the external influences take you, you're almost surely going to end up in hellfire. I mean, basically, the influences of the world, all put together, are not very nice. So, and this is called, in English the term is like to blow with the wind. Like you have a leaf in the wind, which way does the leaf go? The leaf goes whichever way the wind blows. Somebody who does not take control of their life and does not know how to make judgments about the influences or even understand there are influences affecting them, they're just going to blow whichever way, they're going to move in their lives whichever way the influences from the external environment take them. So we need children to understand that their life is one of constantly having messages written in their consciousness. Some will be good messages and take them to Allah and paradise. Some will be bad messages and take them to Shaitan and hellfire. Now, if we had no free will and if we didn't have inner speech, we'd be in real trouble. But it is possible to grow up and be a good person, a good Muslim, even in a world full of bad influences. But the way to do it, you're not going to get blown there by the external influences. You have to use your inner speech. So here's where we come to the actual use of this. And you need to use this on children, and you need to teach them that this is what is happening. Remember, with your inner speech, as I said, you can say absolutely anything you want to say. There's no limits. Any words that a human being can think, you can think with your inner speech. Now, technically, according to Islamic scholars, having a bad message written in here does not necessarily move you in a bad direction. It changes you, but it doesn't necessarily move you in a bad direction. But what it does, it increases the probability that you will move in a bad direction. Because we'll use an example of teenage girls and Christina Aguilera, for those who know who Christina Aguilera is. Anyone not know who Christina Aguilera is? If you don't know who she is, you're very blessed. Christina Aguilera is a young woman singer, early 20s, who is particularly well known for not wearing many clothes when she sings and singing rude songs. And she started out when she was either early teen or preteen on Mickey Mouse Club. And she dressed, for Western point of view, in a relatively modest manner and sang relatively okay songs. But she reappeared when she was about 18 years old on videos on MTV dressing in an extremely rude manner. I mean, very tiny skirts and singing not very nice songs. Then, when she was about 20 years old, she had a new video out on MTV, and the name of the song was "Get Dirty." And you can imagine what she might be suggesting. And this is hard to believe, but it's really true. Not only did she not wear enough clothes, she sang the song in her underwear, in little tiny underwear. I mean, not like a bikini Western people wear on the beach. I mean, it was clearly tiny underwear. Now, she is quite popular with a lot of young people. And so, say for instance, somebody was a young teen Muslim girl, and they're watching MTV. I mean, I think they shouldn't be watching MTV, but lots of young Muslims watch MTV, unfortunately. And so they see Christina Aguilera singing one of the songs, and here she has some clothes on, but not enough, right? And so the girl sees her and thinks, wow, Christina Aguilera looks so cool dressed like that. So Christina Aguilera is a social influence. And I would say seeing somebody dressed in a very immodest manner is a bad message written in here, not a good message, because that's not what Allah wants. But as I said, the message doesn't hurt you yet. What hurts you is what you think about it. So say for instance the girl says, wow, Christina Aguilera looks so cool dressed like that. And she says, I wish I could dress like that. And she says, when I get away from home and my mother can't tell me how to dress, that's the way I'm going to dress. So if she says those things, she has followed that bad message by saying positive things about that bad message. In other words, she has followed that bad message with a reward, which means it will increase in rate and magnitude in the future. It's something that she'll be more attracted to in the future. So, which means in the future, she is more likely than she was to commit bad action. Which would be dressing that way. So, after seeing Christina Aguilera dressed that way, thinking it looks so cool and wanting to dress that way herself, then she goes over to a friend's house. And the friend says, oh, you don't need to dress like a Muslim girl all the time. You can wear some of my clothes, and we'll go to a disco. And so where she otherwise, without seeing Christina Aguilera, might have said, no way. She's already said, I would like to dress that way, and that way is cool. So she's taken herself part way already to the bad action. When the opportunity comes to take the bad action, she is very likely to take it. So now she goes with her friend to the disco, dressed like Christina Aguilera. And she meets people there, and they're all saying, wow, you're so cool, you look really great dressed like that. So bad action is rewarded, which means it will be followed by more bad action. And that gets rewarded. And until it becomes habit. And that becomes her way of life. So you see how you can go from a bad message, and you think positive things about a bad message, and you end up in a bad way of life. You don't have to, but you certainly could. The probability is higher. But because we are free to think anything we want to think, that girl could have, instead of saying what she said, she sees Christina Aguilera on MTV, and she says, oh, poor Christina Aguilera, when she was little, nobody ever taught her to dress right. So she says something negative about that bad message. And then she says, I'd never dress like that. That's not what Allah wants. So she says another negative thing about the message. And she says, I wish nobody in the whole world dressed that way. So here, what she has done with her inner speech, even though she has had a bad influence on her from the social environment, with her inner speech by saying negative things about the bad message, she has taken away the power of the bad message to harm her, and has in effect moved herself in a positive spiritual direction. So this tool that Allah gave us, the inner speech that made us His Khalifa and gave us free will, allows us to resist bad influence, to resist or not be harmed by bad influence. Good influence works the same way as bad influence. It doesn't help you just by seeing it. It depends also what you think about it. So maybe you have a boy after school and he likes to play soccer, and he comes with his soccer ball, and he goes in the classroom to see his friend, and he wants his friend to go out and play soccer with him and kick the ball around a bit. But when he gets in the classroom, he sees his friend sitting there reading the Quran. And he says to his friend, "Hey, come on, let's go out and play some soccer." And his friend says, "Oh, no thanks, I like soccer, but I think reading the Quran is really important. I don't want to give that up right now." And then I would say that comes under good influence and good message. But he is not helped yet by seeing that. It depends what he does with his inner speech. Because what if he says, "Wow, what a loser my friend is." And then he says, "I can't believe someone would rather read the Quran than play soccer." And he says, "I think I might drop him as a friend. He's no fun." So he has said negative things about a good influence. And then he has taken that good influence and made that good influence into something that moves him negatively in a negative spiritual direction. But he could have said, because he can say anything he wants with his inner speech, could have said, "Yeah, my friend's right, reading the Quran is more important than soccer." And he could say, I should spend more time reading the Quran than playing soccer. And then he says, "I'm really lucky to have a friend like that. He's a good influence." If he had said those things with his inner speech, he took that good influence and increased its power to help him move far along the line in a positive spiritual direction. So, by knowing this and by teaching children to do this, you can give them a tool by which anywhere they go in their life, they are going to be susceptible to having messages written in their consciousness and influencing them. But if they make good judgments on what are bad messages and good messages, and remember and this is like really easy to get the kids to remember, right? You say bad things about bad influences and good things about good influences in your head. So you just get the children to understand this process, that every time they see something that's a new influence on them, they make a judgment. Is it good or is it bad? If their judgment is it's an influence that could harm them, then they always say 2 or 3 negative things about that bad influence. But if they see a good influence on them, they don't just let it pass without thinking about it. They say 2 or 3 good things to themselves about how nice that good influence is. And that way, they will always be moving on the path to paradise. So you can go around in an environment that has a combination of positive and negative messages, and no matter what influences are written into your consciousness, you can make them all steps toward paradise. Now, I think this is an extremely important thing for children to learn. And children, I would say, 5 years old could learn that quite well. You know, say bad things about bad messages and good things about good messages. So this is one of the things we'll want to do in the school also. We'll want to teach the children to look at the influences upon them. You know, we can say, for example, say for instance there's somebody in the class, the whole class, there's 15 kids in the class and they're all sitting there paying attention, and then one kid just decides to jump up and run around the room. So you can say to them, okay, so you all just saw Ahmed get up and run around the room. And now, that's going to write a message in your thoughts, right? So that, having seen that, maybe you could think, yeah, that looks like fun to do. And so if you think that looks like fun to do, you have let what he has done harm you, because you have said something positive about that bad influence. So you say to them, so what do you think you should do? And if they've been told this process, they'll say, we should say how we don't like that. And then in their minds, so what do you say in your mind? So you say, okay, I see Ahmed get up and run around when we're supposed to be working. I wouldn't do that because I won't learn as much. And I wish Ahmed wouldn't do that because he bothers people. So they will say, if we can teach them to say those kinds of things, we can get them to be resistant to the kind of influences in the classroom. Because I don't know how many of you have seen this, but I've seen kids who have come from an environment where they have never hit anybody or never seen anyone hit. And they come into a classroom and there's some bully child in the classroom who just goes up and hits somebody, and this child is watching. And then 2 minutes later you see them go up and hit somebody. Because it looks like the thing to do. And little children don't really know. You know, it seems obvious to us that hitting people isn't right. But it's not always so obvious to 2- and 3-year-old children, maybe even a little older than that. So this is a really important concept to get over to the children. So now we'll get into the final stage of this. I'll have to draw a bigger box. Because now we'll discuss what goes on in that box. And instead of just calling it consciousness, we can call it soul or self or personality. Basically, what's in this box is who you are. You know, this is the you who the world sees and that eventually Allah will judge. Now, as far as I've been able to tell, there is no actual Arabic word for soul. No Arabic word for soul as the English definition of the word. The word soul in English means the non-physical part of the human being. And well, although often in translation from Arabic you'll see the word soul written, it is usually in replacement for ruh or nafs. But in looking at what probably several hundred different scholars have said about the soul in Islam, I find that there is essentially you couldn't say there is an agreement in Islam as to what the soul is. I would say the number one candidate would be the ruh, and number two would be the nafs. Number three would be the qalb, and number four would be the aql. Very rarely, but a few have said it's the aql. Many say it's the ruh. But what I want to say is that the soul is all four of those, and that these four are not really separate things. That every human being has these four aspects, and each one of these is a non-physical aspect. So each one of these is appropriate for that English word, the non-physical part of the human being. But as is often the case in Islamic scholarship, they go deeper in. So from the point of view of Western thinkers and English speakers, the soul is one thing. I mean, there is one thing called a soul, and the whole non-physical aspect of the human being is that. But in Islam, Allah has told us at least 4 things that are non-verbal, are non-physical parts of the human being. And to know how these interact is very, very critical. When at some point, when the child, after conception, when the child is in the mother's womb, and often people say at 120 days, but it doesn't say anywhere in Revelation or Sunnah. There's no 120 days anywhere. It says 40 days and a like period and a like period. And even that 40 days is somewhat in dispute. But somewhere in the development of the child in the mother's womb, probably, let's say between 3 and 5 months, Allah breathes His Spirit in, and when Allah breathes His Spirit in, you might say that the developing child is not fully human until Allah breathes His Spirit in. And when Allah breathes His Spirit in, that is when He makes the developing new child fully human. And also, that is when He makes the child capable of being Khalifa. And that's what distinguishes the child from an animal growing in its mother's womb. So, and the thing that is breathed in is the ruh. And so from the ruh comes the fitra. But other things come with the ruh also. When the Spirit is breathed in, Allah gives us some amazing opportunities that nothing else in His creation has. And it is the opportunity to express some small number of His attributes in some small degree of their power. Allah gives us that through the ruh. And that is what we are supposed to use as Khalifa to carry out our responsibilities. And another name for the ruh is actually God consciousness. This is what Allah breathes into us, a God consciousness. So we become God conscious in the world. By no means am I saying it makes us God or a little bit God or anything like that. What it does, though, it gives us the opportunity to experience a tiny bit of what it is like to be God and to carry out a small amount of God responsibility. And that is what we are to do as Allah's Khalifa. To act on His behalf using some small number of His attributes and some small degree of their power. And all of that comes with the ruh. The ruh, among other things, it tells us, it gives us a knowledge of the oneness and the absoluteness of Allah. It gives us a knowledge of Allah as our Creator. It gives us a knowledge of our responsibility to Allah. And very importantly, it gives us an absolute and true knowledge of good and evil. Now this ruh, the reason why the ruh could not possibly be the soul in the sense that the English word soul means, because we are to get into paradise, our responsibility in this world is to perfect our soul, right? So that you end up with a perfect soul or a soul approaching perfection on Judgment Day. But there's a reason why we can't perfect our ruh. The ruh is, there is another thing which I'll mention now, which you want to be aware of when you're teaching kids in class, and it's called sensory gating. Sensory gating, you have a gate this wide. One person that wide can get through, no problem. What if two try and get through there at the same time? They're you're going to get stuck, and entry will not be very good. That's what this gating means. Sensory means the senses. The way human beings are made, we can only pay attention to one sensory input at a time. For anyone who has ever tried to, for example, listen to two conversations at the same time, do you get all of both of them? No. Do you get 50% and 50%? No. You get like 10% and 10%. Neither one comes in very effectively. So when you are teaching, if you see something happening that distracts the class, like right now, right, when somebody came here, 3 or 4 people look out there. While the people are looking out there, their attention is to that rather than to the words. So those words are not going in as effectively while people are paying attention to another line of sensory input. So this is a very important thing when you're teaching. That if something is going on that you see children attending to, don't just keep talking to them like they're getting it, because they're not. And better to just pause for a little bit until the one sensory gate is open and back on the line that you are trying to give to them. What was your question?
You said when the small thing was in the womb, what is in spirit? Are you referring the spirit to the root, or there is another meaning?
No, that's the rule.
The root.
Yeah. The God consciousness gets breathed into us somewhere in the period, probably between 3 to 5 months, often referred to as 120 days. But importantly, I didn't get to finish this part. The reason we know that the row cannot be the soul that we perfect for Judgment Day is the row is a universal spirit. The row in every person is identical. The row you are born with is the row you will die with. You cannot change it. See, it is the spirit from Allah. So you're not going to change the spirit from Allah. It is what it is. He places it within you, and it stays just as it is forever. But it does influence you. But the influence only goes one way. The nafs, though, the influence goes both ways. And the nafs is perfectible. And where the roh might be considered the spiritual aspect, the nafs might be considered, because in the Quran Allah referred to the nafs as having an attraction to evil. The nafs has an attraction to evil. It is not evil in itself. Some people think there's something bad about the nafs. There's nothing bad about the nafs at all. The nafs are absolutely necessary for us to survive. And so the nafs we are born with is the lowest possible level of nafs. And at that lowest level, what the nafs is doing, it is saying to us, whatever you want is okay, do whatever it takes to get it. The only thing it cares about is satisfying its needs. And its needs are physical. So at its lowest level, the nafs acts, and I would call the nafs at its lowest level an animal nafs.
It's like the ego and eat, but it's more complex.
But what?
Ego, eat, it's...
Well, actually, since you brought that up, I'll show in a minute why those concepts are not correct.
No.
But it's very interesting why they're not. Because they seem to relate.
Yes.
Okay.
For now.
No, they seem to be very close, maybe the same thing.
Yeah.
But I'll show why they're not at all.
Oh.
But anyway, the nafs is basically the animal desires or the physical desires. And the nafs is just purely saying to you at its lowest level, satisfy your needs. I don't care what your needs are. I don't care what you do to satisfy them. Just get your needs satisfied. That's why little babies are very hard for us to deal with. Little babies are like a little ball of nafs. They want every single need met, and they want it met right now. And they don't care what else is going on. You could be lying there dying. The baby wants some food, it still wants its food. And so, obviously, that's a good survival tactic for a baby, you know, to demand somehow that its needs be met, or maybe it wouldn't survive. But it's not very nice to meet an adult that's still at that level.
So you mean to say that we are born with both enough in us?
Well, I mean, an animal has nafs also. An animal doesn't have a row.
But we human beings are born with both. That's
Well,
how we are different from animals.
yeah, we're born with both, but we didn't develop with both. Allah placed the row within, but we developed with the nafs within us. So Allah has made human beings and animals to develop with a nafs built in. So that nafs, in the Quran, Allah mentions 3 levels of nafs. A lot of scholars break that into 5 levels, but 3 levels is enough. And I'm going to name them slightly differently. Animal. So that's the level that everyone is born at. So everyone is born with their nafs acting at the animal level, which is just saying, I want what I want and I don't care about anything else, I just want my needs met. Allah hopes that we will, gives us the opportunity to move from that animal level up to a middle level, which I call the questioning nafs. And what I mean by questioning, here you don't ask any questions. You want something, you get it. You don't care what, you don't care if it's okay, that's not a consideration. The only consideration is, do you get what you want? At the questioning level, you still want the things, but you say to yourself, yeah, I want that, but it is okay. I really like the look of that toy the other child's playing with. So I want it. But is it okay for me to take it? How's he going to feel? See? So this is where you start questioning your desires. And then the highest level of nafs is satisfied. And what you are satisfied with at this level is you are satisfied with what Allah says is okay and what Allah says is not okay. Doesn't mean you just go along with it grudgingly. It means you are really happy with that. What Allah says is right, that's what you feel is right. What Allah says you can have, this is what you want. What Allah says you can't have, you don't want it. And so at that level, you have fully controlled your nafs. And this is really our purpose here on earth, is to learn to control our nafs and to raise our nafs to the satisfied level. To bring our desires in line, fully in line with Allah's desire. Now, the question, an important question might be, what ages? See, because in school or with children, we want to help them raise their level of nafs. The idea is to get your nafs up as early as possible. Because if anyone's ever met an adult who is still working at the level 3, the animal level nafs, meaning they want what they want and they don't care who they hurt to get it. These are really nasty people, and they're terrible people in the world. And nobody likes them. So you don't want kids to grow up at that level. So you want them to get out of that as soon as possible. I would say certainly by 2 years old, a child should be moving from the animal level nafs to the questioning level. And with all things, we learn everything. And so for parents and teachers, it is possible to teach the children things to help raise their nafs. I mean, one of the things, you know, the example I've already given, a child sees another child with a toy, some kids just go up and grab it. One of the things to say to them, to help them raise their level of nafs, is to say to them, well, you just grabbed that toy from this little boy. How would you feel if he grabbed the toy from you? Will you like that? And the child will say, no. You say, well, what you should think when you want that toy that he's playing with, if you take it, he won't like it just like you wouldn't like it. And then see, you're getting him toward that questioning level. So you can actually teach children to question their desires that come from their nafs. And I would say by 5 years old, I would hope a child could be starting to make some movement from a questioning level to a satisfied level. So they can, it's probably not too many children at 5 feel perfectly satisfied with, you know, everything that Allah says okay to and not okay to, but they can be well on their way. And so in our school, we will want to be, unfortunately, some of the kids may come in still primarily at the animal level, although they shouldn't be, right? But it's not very unusual to find 5-year-olds that are still pretty much bound up in the lowest level of nafs. So you want to really quickly help them get up to at least a questioning level. And those who are already at a questioning level, you want to be giving reasons to move to a satisfied level. And you remember I said earlier, what do you do to change people? You change how they think. How do you change how they think? By the messages you write in there. And so the main way we write messages in children's consciousness is by what we say to them as a social influence. So we say the kind of things to them, like Allah really likes it when we do what He wants, but He doesn't like it when we do things He doesn't like. And that's helping them get toward that satisfied level. That they start thinking that the place to be is liking what Allah likes and not liking what Allah doesn't like. They may not get there yet, but at least they know that that's within their goals. So we want to be purposefully trying to move the children along in the level of their nafs in the school. So the nafs, so I'll just erase that one again so it doesn't interfere with these others. And then we get to the qalb. And the qalb is quite a complicated one. The qalb is often referred to as the heart. And I would say, in general, our ummah thinks the qalb is that organ in the chest. I think it is widely thought in the ummah that the qalb is referring to the organ in the chest. And there is hadith from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that might lead you to think that. But it is virtually a unanimous position of the scholars that the qalb is not necessarily that organ. The qalb is considered to be the core of your being. And your being really is not the physical body. The core of your being is your spiritual self, which may have some link to the physical heart. But specifically, the qalb is not referring to the physical heart, although it may include the physical heart. But the qalb is referring to the core of your being, the essence of who you are. It is the real self. And on Judgment Day, when you are judged, you will be judged essentially on your qalb. In other words, on Judgment Day, Allah is going to weigh all the good and all the evil you have done. But all that good and all that evil is, in essence, who you are. It's the essential you. It's the physical manifestation of you. So what Allah is really judging you on is who you actually are. And Allah knows perfectly who you are. That self that Allah is going to judge is what we call the qalb. It's also referred to sometimes as the organ of discernment. The word discernment in English means the decision making. To discern is to decide. And it is the qalb that really makes the decisions. The last of them is the aql. The aql is the intellectual aspect. And the aql is the only part, when we talk about the mind, and when we use inner speech, that is the aql. The qalb, the nafs, and the ruh, they don't do any inner speech. Only the aql does inner speech. And the aql is the one that links to the physical body. These others, they're all four of these are non-physical. But the aql does actually link to the physical body because the aql arises out of the physical body. Allah places within you during your development the same way He does the nafs and the qalb. It develops within the womb with you. And the aql is the activity of the neurons of the brain. So, but the aql is not the neurons of the brain, remember. I said it is the activity of the neurons of the brain. And the neurons of the brain interact with each other by an exchange of light energy, of light. And light is a non-physical thing. So the aql is non-physical also, but it arises out of the physical. So the aql is where the connection with the physical body is made. And the aql is made to be perfectly logical. So human beings are virtually totally logical.